helping, and she rang me up and she said to me, she said, I'm planning to kill myself with my 2 kids, you've got to help me.
Welcome back to the Open Up podcast, into episode 96 with the CEO of Brain Wellness Spa and the creator of Q&R Therapy itself, Terri Bowman. I'm so stoked to do this, and I'm grateful that you took the time to be here.
Thank you, Lachlan. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm really excited to be able to share my journey, share a little bit about what Q&R does for people, a little bit about some of the things that I've learned along the way. My struggles with mental illness were massive compared to most, but I'm really excited.
Okay, seeing as we've touched on Q&R and seeing as you created it yourself, and you're positively impacting people with that modality of therapy, can you give us a brief overview or summary of what Q&R is?
Do you don't get my treatment until you get my treatment. Is that right, Lachlan?
Yep.
So it's really hard to explain because Q&R works at a very a deep level, and what it does is it actually interacts with the connected memories. So you've got genes, DNA, and chromosomes, and then you've got the neurons. And when you actually have a thought, the neurons, goes through the pathways and goes through the synapses and travels where it has to travel, goes through, it goes through a highway of sophistication. But then when it actually comes to behaviour and your feelings and emotions, the neurons go out there and they knock on the gene's door and they say, excuse me, can I have that information to support that behaviour? So it kind of like goes, and the genes go, oh, holy dolly, yep, let's go in, grab that. They give it back to this interconnected memory and it shoots it up to the neurons, and all of a sudden you're actually irrational like an old woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so what Q&R does is interact with that connected memory and stops the neurons that, in that ineffective thought and thinking, in moment where you actually trigger, it stops it actually blocks that memory. So then it interacts with that and it stops the neurons from going into the actual information in your genes that actually drags out that behaviour. It takes time, like it's not an instant fix, but with your session, could you all your behaviour that you normally have, could you get back into it?
No, and that was one of the things you mentioned before my session, that someone that you'd treated wasn't too happy with the way that she felt, being so content and peaceful.
Yeah. I've only ever had one of them. But I and that was even before I got really good at changing the reality of the brain. But yeah.
And you saying that, I was kind of wondering why anyone would ever be in a space where they didn't want to be at peace. And after my session, I found it upsetting, like surprisingly to me, I found it upsetting that I was feeling so content and so peaceful and that I couldn't latch on to anything negative at all. It almost felt foreign, like it wasn't supposed to be that way. So it was a massive shift, a massive adjustment.
I know, and I love fast changes, and I should actually slap myself a little bit because in the mental health space, like, we can't afford to have people on a 4 to 6 month waiting list to try and actually deal with their current problems. We can't afford, people are dying by killing themselves on a regular basis because there's not a quick intervention to actually stabilise the brain. And and what I've always wanted to do, and the other difficulty I have is we're not government funded and we're not government supported.
Yep.
And so people to come in and access my treatment, number one, actually have to get immediate results, or else I wouldn't be in business. Now we actually have 2 big businesses. You see how big that one of them, and I've got another one.
Beautiful businesses too.
Do you know, they're out there stunning, aren't they? They're out there stunning. Both of them, you haven't seen South Perth, equally as stunning but different. And I employ professional mental health workers. So I've got psychologists, I've got social workers and everyone in between, and so to give that quality of care, to give that quality of love, to give that quality of support and everything like that, comes at a price. It's not as expensive as some people. You know, I've actually rang up a psychiatrist when I was going through my thing, and you know, his fee for an hour was $480, but if he referred me back to a doctor, he put his fee up to $530. That's serious.
Wow.
That's serious, and we're actually not like that. But what I had to do is I actually had to create something that actually was really kind of spontaneous change and switch the reality. So your reality changed. Does that make sense? And so to stabilize the brain really quickly, you have to change the reality of the mind and the brain. Yeah. And that's where, and for some people absolutely love it because the suffering of their brain is so acute, it's so intense, and it's so debilitating, and the suicidal thoughts are so dominant and controlling that gives them immediate relief. But in your case, it was a bit of a shock.
Yep.
You weren't expecting it.
No, not at all.
No, and sometimes we have to micromanage people like you because it actually is extreme. I say this to people. You know, your brain is in downtown Syria. You go to sleep for half an hour. All it was half an hour, wasn't it?
Yep.
You didn't hear what I was saying?
No.
You didn't know I was gonna. You didn't even know I was doing anything.
I just felt like I was in outer space.
Yeah. So you went into this beautiful place. Your mind drifts off. That music is really lovely. Most people like the music, and then you're in downtown Syria. You're in conflict in your brain. There's bullets firing. You know, negative bullets going everywhere. You wake up and you're in the Maldives. Can you imagine those two realities? That's a little bit what it's like. But, you know, for some people, and I forget to say to people, look, you know, you might be, not many people do, but there is that chance. But I'm all about speedy recovery, spontaneous change, and for some people, the ones that are actually have a longer time with us, their brains just aren't ready for immediate change. It takes a little bit longer, so we actually manage those.
It's amazing. And I think the resistance for me, why I butted heads with being at peace after that session with you, was because I went into it thinking, oh, I don't think I have too much to work on. I think I'm in a pretty good place at the moment. And then what your session showed me was that I actually wasn't, that I still have a lot more work to do. And that was the resistance for me. It's like, shit, I'm not this person who's in a really good place. I still have a lot more work to do. It was resistance for me to begin with, but now looking back, I can see like that was a good learning for me.
Yeah. See, I always say this to people, like, I'm a geek when it comes to this stuff. It is my passion. It is my love. It's my drug. What I do is a drug. It's a drug. I get up every day and actually get excited about how I can get the brain to another level. You know, like I'm addicted to this. This is an addiction for me. Yeah. This is an addiction. And every time I take the brain to another level, I transform. And then I realise, I can't say this word, but I realise what a shitey person I've been compared to. And the thing with the brain, it takes 10 to 15 years for your brain to get into a state where it actually goes into a massive crisis. It's a journey. The brain doesn't become unwell overnight. It's a journey, and it generally starts in childhood, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes, and it gets to a point where the triggers are so acute that you go into a crisis, and then you actually, you crash, and some people, they have to go into hospital. Other people, they actually need to go into retreats. Other people, they actually sell up, close their business down and do all that. But but your brain's a little bit like, and I say this to people, and I say to them, have you ever had a favourite pair of Ugg boots? And you wear them, and you wear them, and you wear them, and you wear them, and they're comfortable, and they look, and you think they look great, and then you get a new pair, and you realise how bad they are. That's your brain. That's your brain. You don't realise how bad your brain is until you get a new reality and a new mindset, but we also heal the brain. So you actually got healing of the brain. Did you notice your mood lifted?
Yeah.
You know, did you notice that you were more contented?
Yeah.
Did you notice that you didn't have a care in the world?
Yes. Which was also frightening.
Yeah. Worry is the biggest problem that causes most people's mental illness. Worry.
Yeah. All right. So before we move on from here, what is the definition of QNR?
So QNR is quantum neurorecoding. So what QNR, quantum neurorecoding? I've been attacked by neuropsychologists about using the word quantum, and I didn't realise that science actually owned it. But quantum is how can I explain this? It's actually quantum neurorecoding is actually it's
like on an energetic level.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually work out how the best way to explain this. But what quantum is actually it's not metaphysical, but it's actually a energy. It's an energy that's unnatural. It's an energy that's unnatural. We've got energy in our brain that's unnatural to us, and it goes past it goes at a speed of sound, light, and frequencies. So it's the speed of everything. The quantum is actually in the speed of everything. But it's highly intelligent. It can change all subatomic particles and everything like that. So I use quantum. Quantum neurorecoding gets into the quantum state. It's just a state. It's not the actual process. It's just a state. Neuro brain recoding. That's what we do.
That's awesome. I love it. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. One question before we begin with your story. Mm-hmm. Could you please describe the way that you view yourself as a woman and or human?
Okay. I'm so busy helping other people. I don't have time to think about myself. Describe myself as a woman. That's a big thing. Do you know what? I actually will go through my story. I need my journey to actually become, to actually understand what humility is.
Yeah.
I actually had to be incredibly humble to become a servant to people with mental illness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Humility is the essence of being a big contributor, and my journey with this, I've actually only just started. A lot of people don't know who I am. I've been going for 13 years, so it's been a long time. I've been at this for 13 years, but I actually had to work out how to be in my womanhood, or in my person, in my human essence, and in my behaviour, to become humble enough to be able to connect with people that are actually wanting to die. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are you content with the person you are right now?
Yeah, really content. I'm loving it.
You deserve to be.
I'm loving it. And do you know, I've actually done some work. I've actually developed a whole body of work, and it's actually transformational development. Personal development takes years. I'm into quick. I'm speed. So this is a whole work that actually develops you as a person, but it develops every essence of you, because you can get your brain right, but if the actual essence of you, and what's the essence of you? Your identity, your personality, your character, your mind, and your spirit, your soul, your chakras, your meridians. If they're not developed, you actually have a better brain, but the essence is still crappy in nature. Does that make sense? So I've actually cracked all that. So I feel amazing. I feel like I've swallowed the $150 million lotto in my. That's how I feel.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I feel like that.
All right, let's get on to your story. I think you said it starts at about 45. So can you walk us through that?
So my journey started a bit before 45. What I did was I actually came across Bruce Lipton. Do you know Dr. Bruce Lipton?
He's amazing.
I came across his work. Gee whiz. Wow. So I'm nearly 56 now, so early 40s. And then he actually, there was one of his, and I just kind of looked at it, and all of a sudden these light bulbs were going on. Does that make sense? Prior to that, I was working we had our own business and we were managing teams of people. And one of the biggest things that was a constant frustration is people always got stopped. You know, they couldn't bridge the gap between failure and success, and it was always failure and success. And I found it relatively easy to actually do the work to get successful. So I was actually a very resilient person. I used to public speak to audience, and the biggest one was a crowd of 10,000. Back then I used to always get anxiety and used to get nervous and everything like that, like you do. And then I'd get into my flow, I'd be fine, but I'd actually always be able to perform. And these some people just couldn't perform. And so there was a technique called Psych K, and there was a guy called Rob Williams, and he was actually it was on one of Bruce Lipton's videos. There was videos back then. And I watched it and I thought, wow, you know, that's the missing link. So I went over to the UK and studied his technique, and then I came back and put some into practice, but I went back to Germany to actually do advanced study into it, learning study. We actually, you know, whatever. And when I came back, I found I was really gifted. You know, I actually had a natural ability in doing that. So word got out all over the place. And I actually, I had a bit of freedom in my life, and I was working from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, one after the other. And then word got out, and I was actually asked to go down to Bunbury and work in a clinic down in Bunbury, and I was doing this and I was doing that, and people were coming from here, coming from there, and it was really, do you know, the thing is, I needed to actually become really humble, because I was getting caught up in my ego.
Yeah.
You know, I was actually getting caught up in my self-importance, and I was actually getting caught up in my significance. And I was actually feeling very powerful. Like I was doing stuff. Like there was one, I don't know whether the actual testimonial is still on my website, but one woman come to me, she had copper poisoning, and I did some work on her, and then she went and got tested a week or two back, and the copper had gone. And then the person who actually was testing and treating her for copper poisoning rang me up, and then the next one came up was lead, and then we did some more work, and that was gone. Does that make sense? And he said, and he couldn't believe it, because it normally takes 12 months to get rid of it out of your body, doing all this, but hers kind of went within 2 weeks. And I was kind of thinking, I was feeling, you know, you get caught up in your own little trip. Does that make sense? And it's a dangerous place, especially when you're working with people with emotions. You know, now I look back, I was actually kind of feeling, and then I look back, and it was a really dangerous place, because you could really, it's just a dangerous place. And then all this was, that was going on, and I was developing this, but there was a common thing that was actually occurring. People, and this is the cycle, not with all, but this is the cycle with a lot of mental health treatments. It's the revolving door. It's a revolving door. It's a revolving door. And then I would actually help people change their perception, change their belief systems. But then what was happening in 6 to 8 weeks' time, they'd come back and it was the same story. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Same story. And it got really frustrating. I kind of thought, I can't morally charge for this. I can't morally keep charging for these people to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. And so what actually happened was I kind of threw everything away, and I thought, this is not working. I'm just contributing to the revolving door, but doing, because you can patch somebody up, but long-term change is really quite complex, because there's a genetic side of things as well. So I threw that away and I started working on a modality. My first phase one was, I called it My Conscious K. I don't know, came from somewhere. I really struggle to name things. And My Conscious K, I just called it My Conscious K. And it was different. It was different, but it was getting better results than what I was getting before. And it was working on a whole heap of different levels. It was more touching the body. I didn't like that, but what I did was I actually sat down and I thought, what are the 5 most effective modalities out there? And what I did was I actually studied the principles, not the technique. I wasn't interested in the technique, but what the principles of what the outcome was. And I actually integrated those 5 principles together and actually created the actual foundations. It's not the actual technique, but it was my foundations. I've changed it since then, but this is my foundations. NLP, great modality. EFT, great. I've actually evolved from that, a great modality. A modality called NET, out there, amazing modality. Neuralink, I don't know if you've heard of it, but that's really, really quite incredible. That gets the brain, that's a modality that you can actually communicate to the brain to go and fix the body. That's a great modality. And kinesiology. So I kind of worked out the principles, put it all into one thing, and then started working from there. But I was dealing. The better I got, the sicker the people were. So they kind of just kept coming into my orbit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then what actually happened was I was dealing with all these really unwell people, and I actually couldn't identify with them. My antidepressant was an airline ticket, and it was in my bag. So if I kind of got tired, I used to just pull up the airline ticket and take off, and it'd come back. I was happy, that was me. And I didn't know what it was like to suffer. I knew what it was like to be in a miserable relationship, but I didn't know what it was like to suffer. To give you an example of how strong my mental health was, I went through IVF, and but this is before IVF. I got pregnant, and then the baby was dead at 12 weeks, so it was lucky it was only 12 weeks. And then I had to have it aborted, and I had to go in, and we told everybody, gone out and bought little tiny things and did all that, got all excited, and then at 12 weeks it had to be aborted. But I was in the hospital reading The Magic of Thinking Big, because I didn't want that to affect my emotional state. I didn't want the trauma. I didn't want that to affect my emotional state. That's not normal.
Yeah.
That's not normal. But that's how committed I was to not let life affect me. Does that make sense? That was the circumstances. I could have chose to get it affected, but I didn't want it to affect me. And the doctor said to me, "You're allowed to cry." And I said, I'm fine. And maybe I wasn't so fine, but that was the sense of willpower that I had.
Do you think that's because you were in a position where you were helping people, and
This
as this leader,
this
leader, you didn't want to be seen as someone suffering?
Do you know what I think it was? I left home when I was 15, and I just didn't love living in my family life. At that time, I hated it, and somehow I convinced my parents to let me move up to Brisbane, and I stayed with my grandparents for a little bit. That didn't work out, so before I turned 16, I was actually renting, and I didn't want any support from my parents, because if they were supporting me, they controlled me. So I actually had to get tough. Does that make sense?
Yep.
At a young age, so I was supporting myself from 15 on.
Well.
Yeah, but I had a great life. I lived my weekends were the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast. It was good. No parental control. Good. But, we kept our nose clean. I kept my nose pretty clean. We just had a great time. But I think I actually had to have resilience. But I also, when I made the decision to leave my family, I must have had enough confidence and self-esteem to do that.
Why did you have to leave?
They moved from Western Australia to and they bought a farm, and we were 16 kilometres out of town. No transport. I was isolated on this farm. It was isolated. It was the worst thing. But because I'm in my late 50s, back then, you know, what actually happened was women were only just bred to babies and get a part-time job, and then babies and part-time job or whatever. We weren't developed to be leaders or business owners. Does that make sense?
Where does that drive and that confidence come from? Was that something you were brought up with?
My dad and my mum didn't. She had a story on herself. Mum's first baby died on Mother's Day in hospital, and she was only 17, so she never got over that. And then eventually she had us, and she had a breakdown and ended up in a psychiatric hospital for 3 to 6 months. And then my father wouldn't look after us, so we were put into an orphanage / foster home when I was 4 years old. And I still remember that was pretty tough going. My childhood wasn't amazing. Yeah. You know, we were regularly got beatings, but they did back then, you know, in the 60s. They beat you. You know, we used to get what they call the iron cord. I don't know if you know what the iron cord is.
No.
It's electric cord.
Oh, yuck.
And we used to get beaten with that. We used to go to school with belts all over your body. Normal. It was normal. You know, days I didn't get fed for days because I wouldn't eat the food. I couldn't eat certain food. Kids are like that, but my father grew up from the Depression years, so that food, you had to eat food. They grew up with no food. He had to eat food, and I couldn't eat stuff that was cooked and all that type of stuff. But yeah, so. Just
want to take a quick second to give you a word from our sponsors. Hopefully I'm wearing the same clothes I was back in that interview, but don't worry about it. We've got Made It Nutrition, that is plant-based supplements. They're all about the holistic lifestyle. They're all about the mind, body and spirit, and they're doing that through their high intensity bodyweight workouts as well as those plant-based supplements. Number 2 is CrossFit Longhaul, the Good Times gym out in Maddington. Now what they do is they offer personal training. They obviously offer CrossFit group training, and they will tailor your nutrition plan to help you achieve your goals. And the reason that I've partnered with CrossFit Longhaul out there in Maddington is because I'm a friend of the owner. I know her, and she's all about that holistic approach as well, combining and intertwining the physical and the mental. So you'll be in good hands there. CrossFit Longhaul out in Maddington. Ciao. Knowing like what your mum went through, do you feel like that played any role in you wanting to, I guess, stay resilient while you went through that abortion?
I didn't consciously reflect back on my mother, but I was really scared I was actually going to end up like my mother. I was scared. Mum, do you know, the work that we're doing today, there is so many people with abandonment issues, abandonment and rejected love. And one of the byproducts of abandonment is you spend half your life punishing your parents, punishing your mother or punishing your parents, you know. How you do that, withhold love, that's how you do it. You get reactive and all that type of stuff. Loneliness is a byproduct of abandonment. So there's so many people that are lonely. My mother was not emotionally available to us. Okay. You know, and a lot of women today aren't emotionally available to their children. And their mothers weren't emotionally available. A lot of fathers are absent dads. Does that make sense? Yeah. They're struggling with trying to provide for the children, trying to do a job they hate. You know, you think of FIFO workers, they come home, they are absent fathers. So these kids grow up spiritually disconnected from their parents, and that's where I think 60% of behavioural issues come from, because their parents are just not there.
Did you ever feel enough for your parents, knowing that you had to go into care?
I actually punished my mother a lot when I was older. But you know, mum and I never had a connection with my mother. Dad was tough on us, but Dad and I kind of got that connection. But as a family unit, we were really dysfunctional as a family unit. There was no healthy dynamic in our family. Dad was always had anger issues. We were always scared of him. I remember one day, you weren't allowed to eat at certain times. You were only allowed to eat at this,
Wow.
and then so you couldn't eat when there was times that you weren't allowed to eat. And I remember sneaking into Milo, and my dad come in, and I got so scared that I had to hide it in the lounge, because if he found me eating that, I would have copped it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And when we wouldn't eat, that food went into the fridge at night time, then in the fridge, and then it would come up in the breakfast, and you can't eat the same thing from dinner. So you'd have it for breakfast, couldn't eat it, have it for lunch, couldn't eat it, have it for dinner. So that could go on for 1 or 2 days, a little girl not eating, but that's actually because that was, and it was normal. It was normal. I talk to a lot of people, in my age group, normal. The brutality with children, normal.
Yep, exactly. So I can understand why you wanted to move away if it was dysfunctional then. Fast forward back to you going through this abortion and being super resilient, not letting it impact you. Can you walk us through the story from there?
Okay, so that was my mental health. So when I was working with people, I actually couldn't identify them suffering because I chose not to suffer.
Yep.
Like I actually had a mind that was strong enough that didn't go down that path. My will, my mindset, and my positive nature, but I must have had to have a healthy perception. Does that make my perception must have been reasonably healthy? And there's a guy called Viktor Frankl.
Yep.
Have you heard of him? Man's Search for Meaning. He was in the concentration camp, and his mind, was it was so developed and so intelligent and so positive. Does that make sense? That he survives that where a lot of people never survive. So it's possible. It's possible. But then I remember saying out, I believe I was created to do this.
Yeah.
And I was actually and I was on a pathway, a spiritual pathway, call it what you want to call it. And I remember just saying out aloud, I said out, call it God, call it Spirit, call it Buddha, call it whatever, Allah, call it whatever you want. And I said out aloud, I said, please God, help me understand what these people are going through, because I can't identify with it. Within 6 months, I'd had a psychotic episode and I was in a locked ward. And they kept me there for 5 weeks, and the drugs were terrible, the shock was terrible, just everything. And that actually, and every time I had a period, I developed a condition called menstrual psychosis. So 2 days before an onset of a period, I would have a psychotic episode, and then when I finished the period, I'd go normal.
Wow.
And so my brain, I became extremely suicidal. I was actually planning my death. There was only 2 things that stopped me from dying, and that was one was I was scared that I would actually be found and be a vegetable with what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So, but death, I was suffering so badly. Death, look, when people commit suicide, I get it, because you don't want to die, you just don't want to wake up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You just don't want that reality. I couldn't get the reality of suffering out of my brain. And so what I did was, I was planning my death. I actually worked out I was going to go up to John Forest National Park, go into a laneway and just do it out there, so nobody could find me. So I was scared I was going to get found and be a vegetable, and that would have been worse. And then there was a girl I was helping, and she rang me up and she said to me, I'm planning to kill myself and my 2 kids, you've got to help me.
Wow.
And I said to her, Kylie, suicide, the act of suicide is a conscious brain behaviour. I work on the unconscious, I don't work on the conscious. And she said, you've got to help me. She said, I'm obsessing about killing my kids. She was actually wanting to drive into a tree and she was that bad. And so I couldn't let her down, so I had to work it out. But, it was actually a gift of a problem. My journey has been a total gift of a problem, I've been schizophrenic, I've been bipolar, I borderline personality disorder. I don't believe it's actually a mental illness. It's a personality disorder.
Yep.
Personality is a reality of the mind. The mind is outside of the brain, but we work on that. Most people just get rid of attitudes, but so all my journey, I had to learn how to actually fix my brain, and in fixing my brain, I actually understood the actual process of the disorder, and then I had to work out what the mechanics were. Like what was depression? Like I had severe depression. Well, if you're so suicidal, you're severe depressed. I got anxiety. I remember not being able to talk to a person without almost having panic attacks.
Wow.
I was that weak. See, my brain became so weak from the drugs and the constant psychotic episode. I've had about 40 psychotic episodes in 10 years.
So how do those manifest for you?
The psychotic episodes. Yeah. Look, they come out of nowhere. So every time, like I actually had psychotic episodes. I was actually 1 year. I would have a psychotic episode, be in hospital for 2 weeks, and they really wreck your brain. And then I was out for 2 weeks, another psychotic episode, in hospital for 2 weeks, out for 2. That happened 9 months in a row.
Wow.
And my brain was so severely burnt out, I had to learn how to get the brain out of burnout. So everything was a learning lesson. You know, it was a gift. It's a gift. It was a gift. At the time, I felt it was like being in hell with Satan. Does that make sense? But it was an absolute gift, because the biggest problem today is when you're actually mentally unwell, you're actually in severe burnout, and I had to get to that state where I was in severe burnout.
Wow. So for someone who doesn't know what a psychotic episode is, what is that?
Psychosis. I don't know what the technical term in a psychiatric term is, but I was insane. When your external reality doesn't match your internal reality. So my external reality, I could see the world like this, but my internal reality was out there. Insanity hits in. So I was insane. So I was just insane. But then insanity is not a bad reality. It's just an altered reality. It's an altered reality, you know. And the doctors would say, "What was going on through your mind?" You go, when you're actually insane, you're on this trip. Does that make sense? And then when you come back to awareness, you're so embarrassed. That you're too ashamed. The thing is, I had to know what it was like to be shamed, humiliated. I had, because of psychosis, I'd actually. I can laugh about it now. Couldn't for a long time. I was wandering around in the zoo, and they didn't come and get me. I was locked there in the night. I spent the night in the zoo, and the next morning, you know, because I had, you know, had voices in my head and everything. I actually took off all my clothes and wandered around the zoo naked.
Wow.
You know, that's, you know, and I was so ashamed of myself when that happened. That stopped me from even trying to promote what I was doing. I was so ashamed. What if somebody came out and they found out, and then it went public, and nobody would come and see me? When I first went into a locked ward, my first psychotic episode, the treating doctor, he was a public psychiatrist, mm-hmm. and he actually had his private clinic. One of my clients went in there, took a brochure, because I was working with him, took a brochure in, and he rubbished me, he defamed me. He said, "I know this woman, this is what happens to her. If you go and see her, you might as well, just wasting your money, you might as well go and spend it on a circus." So you know, that's, and family, I had friends when I was having my episodes. Friends just disowned me. I've been kicked out of the house. I had nowhere to live, you know.
So it's not just you that was ashamed of you and your behaviour, it was the people around you as well.
Well, do you know what it is? Because my behaviour was extreme. You know, I don't get angry towards them. My behaviour was extreme. I was always this, and all of a sudden my behaviour became this. When you're insane, you actually have no control over your behaviour. No control over your behaviour. Your mind becomes consumed by thoughts and suggestions that you actually act out and do those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it wasn't me that was doing it, it was my brain that was doing it. Does that make sense? And so people can't cope with what they don't understand. And so, you know, they just didn't understand me, so they couldn't deal with me. And I got challenged, people got angry with me. And I know the first time when I had a psychotic episode, I was traumatised by it. I was in trauma. I was disturbed being locked up in a locked ward in Greylands, disturbed by it. I couldn't get out. You have no rights, you have no freedom, and you're locked in this cage type of thing. And the doctor kept telling my family I was actually acting well, so he kept me there longer than what I should have been, because with my condition, it's a rare condition, so it's only on onset of a period, and people, I got out of there. Two of my friends dragged me up to these people up in Byfoot, sat me down, and actually got me to explain myself. I was straight out of a psychiatric ward, and I actually was disturbed. And then disturbed again because these people were angry at me because I went insane, you know. So there was lots of that. You know, I was asked to leave the house twice, and then I remember. By
your partner?
He was him and I are really good friends now. We were separated. My husband was separated, and he chose to look after me, which was really good. But he couldn't cope, so he asked me to leave twice. He just couldn't cope. But I remember thinking I have to be homeless, and actually prostitution, I have to go into prostitution because nobody would employ me. I was too unwell to be employed. So, and it was just all this, but you know, every stage of my life during that period was a learning opportunity and an opportunity for growth and development.
Wow. Did you see it like that as you were going through those periods?
No.
Okay.
No, hindsight's good.
Yeah.
Hindsight's good. When I was going through it, look, you know what? This person here wasn't that person there. When I was actually, you know, I was schizophrenic, so I actually had voices controlling me. I remember one time, you know, I don't have eyebrows anymore. I was shaving, and I couldn't stop it. I was shaving my eyebrows off. I was so controlled by this. I know what it is. I won't say what it is, but I was so controlled by this force inside of me that I've shaved my eyebrows off, and I was about to shave all my hair off, and I couldn't stop it. Does that make sense? I remember it was winter, and I had no clothes on. All I did was stand outside like this for 3 hours. Couldn't move, because it was forcing me. The voices were forcing me to walk the streets, and I was just trying to hold myself back. It wasn't fun.
How do you express going through that to other people? Because I can imagine there'd be that innate feeling that people aren't going to understand you, which they probably won't. And so, like, I'm wondering how you dealt with that and allowed yourself to express that eventually.
I didn't tell anyone.
Really? Wow.
Most of my clients, I talk to some people and just say, look, I was in a locked ward, but I don't tell people. Do you know what it is? It's just to me, it's a non-event now. But that's the beauty of my work. It is just it's a fact. It's not a reality. Does that make sense? If I didn't have my work, I'd be still on a disability pension and living in a Homes West house, not being able to work.
Wow. And how did that come about? Being on the pension?
Because I was so sick, and I actually was constantly in hospital, so I was so sick.
Wow, so you go through the stage where the people around you are forcing you to express yourself, kicking you out, you're unhappy with the way that you're behaving, ashamed of like that behaviour, and then now you get put on a disability pension.
Well, see, I had no, at that time, and that actually happened after 9 months of going in and out of psychiatric hospital every month. I was actually burnt out, but I had no income. But during what I've got to actually explain to you, during this journey, I was still working with people. I was locked up in Greylands, and I had clients I used to lie to get out to work with my clients. I used to tell lies because I was locked up there for so long. I lied about this one coming in from the UK, and I had to go here and I had to go there. So I would lie to get out of a locked ward, to go and fix people up, to go back in there, because I'd rebalance in 7 days.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So in 7 days I would normalise, and but I'd be locked up there for longer, so I'd have to lie to get out.
Wow. Wow, that's extreme.
Look, there's one client. There's one client, and we talked to her. She actually has borderline personality disorder. But she's actually been diagnosed since then with being on the spectrum. And I said to her, how many times have you been in locked ward? And she said, 53 times. I said, you win. You win. You more than me.
So how does someone in that position, being so sick that they can no longer work, pull themselves out of that situation? Because being someone who's had friends who take their life, who's attempted to take their life as well, the easiest option would have been to take your life.
Do you know what? I wanted to. But the thing is, when I learned how to get the suicidal thinking out of my brain, what it is. I had to learn what suicidal to the end point was, to actually fix it. But there's 3 stages of suicide, and then I won't go into it. It's not the platform here. But when you get to that 3rd stage, that's when death is inevitable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? There's a lot of skill you have to do to get the human being, because I'll explain this. There's a life force that's in us. It's not our soul, it's not our spirit, it's not this, but there's a life force inside of us. That was designed many, many years ago. This is a whole new other topic. A long time ago, people lived a lot longer before they became cavemen. That's another story. But that life force was designed to actually for the spirit would let go if the person was suffering, because people live for a long time. And if the suffering of the brain was too intense, so say family members died and they were suffering, that life force would go and then they naturally die. But this is after many, many years of life. Whereas that life force, the spirit is actually part of that connection. The life force decides it wants to go, and then suicide. But how we do it now is really violent. It's really, and people are dying. 6-7 years of age, taking their lives.
Wow.
So, I've actually, in some Aboriginal communities, young kids are taking their lives and all that type of stuff.
Yes, really bad, especially in Aboriginal communities and in Native or Indigenous New Zealand communities as well.
Yeah.
They're among the worst in the world.
Yeah.
So how did you, being in that position, take the steps to get yourself out of that? Not only get yourself out of it, but put yourself in a position to now be running this business, which is making such a positive impact.
What I had to do, look, every it's a spiritual journey. Like, I was actually, I had no control over it. Does that make sense? So every time I actually learnt a specific part of getting the brain right, I then actually had to go and learn again. And how I learnt was actually the impact it had on me. And the hardest thing was, and then what actually happened, which was really beautiful, I had teachers that came to me. So I would learn, and as I learned, then people would just come into my life that were equally harder. And then I'd learn from me, and then I'd actually learn from them, and then I'd develop more of my technique. And but the burnout, I was actually in severe state of burnout. Burnout is actually what stops people recovering from mental illness. Most people that are actually in chronic states of burnout spend most of their lives in bed. I'm talking about chronic.
Yeah.
Some people that are actually in burnout drag themselves to work. They're not effective at work. They're not effective in their home. They're not effective in their family life, and or they just stay in bed and they don't shower. And I was actually at a stage where I was asleep. I just couldn't get out of bed. I didn't want to get out of bed. The brain, when the brain is burnt out, it programs you to go into it's almost womb state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have you been in that state? I don't know if you've been in that state.
No, not quite.
Okay, so in a womb state where the brain defaults back into that womb state, and it's the state where the brain felt the most safe. Okay, that womb state, the best way to replicate that womb state is in a darkened room in your bed. You know, your bed is actually closest thing to womb state. Does that make sense? And so it actually conditions you, and it programs you, and it changes your neurological processes of reality. So you stay in bed. And I was in bed, and the worst part about being in bed, your body aches after a while, but you can't get up. You don't want to. You just don't want to open your eyes. I just didn't want to open my eyes, but I had to earn money, and I had to work out. I had to earn money, or else I was going to be on the streets. So I used to drag my sorry ass into work, and I was like this, and then I'd perk up, and then the thing is, like, you know how you sleep now. People would come in and they'd sleep for about 30 or 40 minutes, you know, or whatever. And what I would do, I'd have a chair, and I'd actually, while they were sleeping, I'd do my work, and I'd be like this for the same time. And for the grace of God, something would trigger me, and I'd wake up 10 minutes before they were due to wake up. But that's the only way I could do it. I was that burnt out. I was sleeping when they were sleeping, and a couple of people saw me and they complained. But she was asleep, but I was burnt out, and I actually had to work out how to get the brain out of burnout, how to heal the brain. You've got to heal the brain, but actually how to get the neurological processes of reality backfiring again, and I'd had to do it on me first.
Wow.
And I've got amazing energy now.
Is that how Q&R was born?
Q&R was developed many years, but it's grown and it's grown and it's grown and it's grown.
That's amazing.
And we actually get really quite sick people coming to see us, and so I've made a documentary because I'm getting a lot of resistance out there in the medical sector.
Yeah.
Because we actually are making a positive impact with what we do. We've got lots of video testimonials. I don't know if you've seen some of them, but there's lots of video testimonials. And the work we do is really special. But how special is it? Have you been to a counsellor or anything before?
Yes.
So when you go in, was mine more relaxing?
Yours was probably the most relaxing methodology I've ever been in or used. Yeah.
And the environment, and the thing is, I needed to know what the psychiatric care was like in the public system. I'm glad I didn't go into private, because it's probably was like Hotel California compared to mine. I actually had a situation where I had a psychotic episode in Singapore, and was actually locked up there, and I was actually tied to a bed for days.
Wow.
So so it's like the Ritz-Carlton, and it was bad here. It's like the Ritz-Carlton here compared to Singapore, and Singapore's developed, so I can just imagine how psychiatric care is in some of these other countries. I was tied up. I couldn't move, tied to a bed. I had to beg for water, and it felt like hours. I had to beg to go to the toilet, and you were tied. And you weren't in a room, you were actually in a big space, and there was about 20 beds all one space.
You've been through a shitload of struggle. How do you now have the confidence to be someone who's put yourself in a position to succeed?
Do you know, one of the things that I actually found that because I had confidence and self-esteem is what gives you resilience. Does that make sense? That's resilience. Look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he might be a right old twat and say some really ridiculous things, but he has got the armour, and kryptonite can't affect him. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so what actually happened, what I lost was my brain went weak. I had no confidence. I had no self-esteem. My self-esteem was right down the bottom. I was never in the gutter before. I was down the bottom. No confidence. I didn't have confidence to talk to people. I was speaking in crowds of thousands. I was flown over to South Africa to speak to people. Had no confidence. And what I understood is, if you don't build confidence and self-esteem when you're working with people with mental illness, they default back into their behaviour. We encourage it. We tell people the benefits of it, but some people don't opt for it, so they actually trigger back. But you actually have to build your confidence, self-esteem. We've got beautiful confidence, self-esteem program, only 3 sessions. I worked out with me how to build mine back, 3 sessions each, and you've got confidence and self-esteem. And now I've developed a transformational development program, and that takes you to a whole new level. And look, I'm just going to predict in the future, but I believe if people did the emotional empowerment program, did the confidence, self-esteem, and did the transformational work, we'd never see them back into our care again, outside of trauma.
That's amazing. That really is. We've got about 10 minutes, so I want to ask you one more question about your story and your journey. Do you feel like you had to go to those depths and go through all that struggle and adversity to be someone who could identify with or relate to the people that you help?
Do you know, the thing is, you can get depressed. People, look, you know, there's some people that came into me that were depressed.
Yeah.
And I said, you don't need me, you just need Brad Pitt. You know, these are women. Yeah. And they weren't men, but these are women. I said, look, if Brad Pitt came into your life and said, hey, you're my woman, do you think you'd be depressed? No way. Misery is more addictive than happiness. You'd break the misery cycle, you'd be happy, and you'd be on cloud 9. Does that make sense? I'm saying, you just need Brad Pitt. You just need Brad Pitt. And so, you know, anyone can do that. But you know what? What drives me the most, what compels me to do what I do, is I actually had to understand what suffering was like. I suffered and I suffered. I suffered for years and years and years. And, you know, that suffering I never want to lose. I could actually get rid of the feeling of suffering out of my brain and in my soul, but I don't, because the moment I lose it, I stop the actual drive to keep this work going. And see, I'm getting a lot of resistance to try and stop me from putting this work out. My legal bills are huge at the moment, because there's all these people wanting to not let this come, because this is treatment without drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's treatment without drugs. It's treatment without years of therapy. It's treatment and healing at the same time. It's treatment and development. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's treatment and life-changing. And it kind of rocks the system a bit, if you can relate to that.
Yeah.
It rocks the system.
They've got a revenue model that relies on that cycle.
One of my lawyers said to me, he said, the problem with the mental health is it's actually like a rent roll. It's guaranteed income. So you keep them in there. So we actually keep, people come to us, if moderate, it's 12 sessions. If they've got a bit more complex, it might be 3 or 4 sessions after that, maybe 5, maybe not much more than that. And then we really encourage them to build self-esteem and confidence. So it's actually a different model, but within 3 to 4 months, you're set and you forget.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I believe good change needs resistance, like going from horse and cart to the automobile, or from candles to light bulbs. People are always going to resist something that they're unsure of. Just like you spoke about Dr. Bruce Lipton and him and his work with epigenetics. All the scholars laughed him out of every lecture hall. And now it's a legitimate science.
Yeah.
So it will be accepted eventually, and I can't wait for the day that it is.
Yeah.
A couple wrap-up questions though.
Yeah.
Knowing everything that you've been through, which is a hell of a lot, what would you say the quality of your life is like now?
Amazing. Look, do you know what? Because my quality of life could be better.
Yeah.
Like I've got a good life. Don't get me wrong. I've got a good life. I've got a good life. My legal bills are actually, you don't go into business to pay massive. I've spent over $100,000 in legal bills already, and it's escalating. My legal bills are escalating now. My lawyer has said to me just recently, he said he's scared that I'll go bankrupt because of his legal bills, because they might take us to court and all that type of thing. The biggest thing is, like, when we had those horse and cart days and we had light bulbs and candles, we didn't have these armies of people fighting fighting for, you know, like,
Yeah.
and the internet and this and this and this and this and this. So I'm only one person, you know. I'm an inventor, I'm a creator, I'm actually a healer, I'm actually an empowerment woman as well. I've got a whole range of programs just for peak performance, that, you know, for peak performance and all that type of stuff as well. But my quality of life, who I am today, and I'm willing to fight this, because if I have the ability, I have the responsibility.
That's amazing. I've never heard that, and I'm definitely stealing that.
No way!
Last question. Knowing all of that, what are you most grateful for right now?
For the shitty journey in psychiatric care.
Yes, that's amazing. Reframing.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. All right. Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the fact that you come here. You're busy. You're the CEO of Brain Wellness Spa. You've got a lot of people to help, people that you positively impact through Q&R therapy. So thank you for making time, but thank you most of all for turning that pain to purpose and doing what you're doing now. I'm grateful that you're here in Perth.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.